This PowerPoint presentation covers Chapter 17 of the Canadian Business English Text, 5th edition. We will be looking at semicolons and colons, Level 1. Skilled writers use semicolons and colons to signal readers about the ideas that will follow. The semicolon is a stronger punctuation mark than a comma, which signifies a pause, but the semicolon is not as strong as a period, which signifies a complete stop. Understanding the use of the semicolon will help you to avoid fundamental writing errors, such as the comma splice, which you will recall is separating two independent clauses with a comma, and the run-on sentence, which has two independent clauses together without any punctuation at all. Once you learn about the semicolon, though, be careful to avoid overusing it. Most independent clauses will end with periods. Join clauses together only when combining ideas that improve comprehension. One of the most common uses of the semicolon is to join two independent clauses separated by a conjunctive adverb. Conjunctive adverbs are covered on page 265 of your Canadian Business English text. Briefly, conjunctive adverbs are used to connect equal sentence elements. They are used to effect a transition from one thought to another, and they often consist of more than one word. Some common conjunctive adverbs are accordingly, consequently, nevertheless, therefore, otherwise, or on the other hand. So those are just a few examples. Let's take a look at three sentences that contain conjunctive adverbs. In the first example, profits are good, therefore we can raise wages, the conjunctive adverb is therefore. When you have a conjunctive adverb, you put the semicolon before the adverb, and you put a comma after the conjunctive adverb. You can see the same thing in the second example. The sentence, our company is doing so well that we will have to pay dividends. In fact, the profits are so robust that we also plan to raise wages. The conjunctive adverb are the words in fact, and you can see there's a semicolon before them and a comma after them. You can see the same thing with the third example. The sentence, this is the first time I've used this software. However, it does seem quite easy to learn. However is the conjunctive adverb that connects two equal sentences. So we need the semicolon before the conjunctive adverb and a comma after the conjunctive adverb. Now we will have a look at another use of the semicolon. Use a semicolon with two or more closely related independent clauses, not separated by a conjunctive adverb or a coordinating conjunction. We just discussed conjunctive adverbs, but you might recall coordinating conjunctions as being those fanboy conjunctions. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. When we looked at the fanboy conjunctions, or also known as the coordinating conjunctions earlier, we looked at them in terms of comma splices. So when we had a sentence that had two independent clauses, putting a comma to separate the two independent clauses was not strong enough, and so we had to use one of those fanboy conjunctions after the comma to join the sentence together and avoid a comma splice. In the examples below, you can see that the two independent clauses are not joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So what we are doing is we are using a semicolon to join the two sentences together instead. I'm going to look at sentences 2 and 3 and come back to sentence 1. In sentence 2, common stock carries voting rights, preferred stock does not carry such right. You can see that there are two independent clauses and there's not a coordinating conjunction there. So what we could have done here is we could have used a comma and the conjunction but, common stock carries voting rights, but preferred stock does not carry such rights. But instead, the writer has chosen to use a semicolon in this case. The same applies for the third sentence, which reads, Julia has spent the whole afternoon with the twins. Now it's time for their father to put them to bed. We could have joined those two independent clauses together with a comma and a coordinating conjunction such as so, as in Julia has spent the whole afternoon with the twins, so now it's time for their father to put them to bed. but instead the writer again has chosen to instead put a semicolon between the two independent clauses. Let's go back to that first sentence now that reads, "Last year we had a very good third quarter. This year, however, we are struggling." You can see that the semicolon is being used to separate two independent clauses that are of equal weight and are closely related. You may be asking yourself, but isn't however one of those conjunctive adverbs that needs also to have a semicolon? And the answer is not in this case. Conjunctive adverbs combine equal sentence elements. So that would mean that this year would be equal to we are struggling. And you can see that that is not the case. So in this case, the word however is just separated by commas and not by a semicolon and a comma. In our previous grammar unit, we looked at creating series of items within a sentence, and we did that by using commas. However, we need to use a comma to separate items in a series when one or more of the items contains internal commas. Have a look at the following sentence as an example. We've invited Jean Kahn, the representative for Disney, Stuart Jones, our vice president of sales, Dominique Martin, CEO of Inventions Montreal, and Tariq Ali, a well-known documentary filmmaker from Britain. You can see that each of the items in the series contains a comma before it gives the title of the actual individual. So because those commas are used within the series, we need to have a semicolon to separate the individual items. Just like we did with the commas, at the end of the series, in the last item, we put an and after the last semicolon. Also in our previous grammar unit, we used commas to separate series of short independent clauses. However, if you have longer independent clauses in a series, you may wish to instead use a semicolon. Consider the following examples. In the first example, my vacation is only 2 months away. Last summer I spent 4 weeks in Turkey. This summer I hope to visit Sicily. You can see that these independent clauses are a little bit longer than the ones that we were looking in the previous grammar unit, and they're separated by semicolons. The same goes for the second example. The union has worked hard to establish membership rights of all employees. The closed shop requires that all new employees must be members of the union before hiring. The open shop allows either status. So you can see how each of those are independent clauses and how they are separated by semicolons. Time for a check your skill. So what I'd like you to do is have a look at these sentences and determine where semicolons and commas are needed. In the first sentence, most faculty members can meet on Thursdays, however none can meet on Mondays. Where do you think the semicolons and commas go? In this example, we have a conjunctive adverb, the word however. We need a semicolon before the word however, and we need a comma after the word however. Here's another example. In the sentence, we're considering the Victorian Inn, Victoria, BC, the Hampton Inn, Ottawa, Ontario, and the Days Inn, Pointe Claire, Quebec. Where would the semicolons and commas go in this particular sentence? This is an example of a series that contains an internal comma. So you can see that the name of the hotel, and then the city, and then the province are all separated by commas. And so we need to have the semicolons between each of the items in the series. And then we need to have the word and after the last semicolon to make this all readable. In our last example, IKEA does not sell furniture, it sells quality. Can you tell where the semicolons and commas might go? We have two independent clauses that are not joined by a conjunctive adverb or a coordinating conjunction, also known as a fanboy conjunction. We need a semicolon between them. It's time for you to move on to some exercises on this unit now.